All right, so my name is Darren. If you guys don't know me, I am the course director for Advanced Session Recording, and we have a crazy honor today to, Bob hates it when I say that, but pretty much the godfather of mixing. I mean, he is by far who most professional mix engineers have analyzed, tried to figure out what he did, listened to, and just, we're in awe. And so, I could sit here and read out some credits of what he's done. We can pick on the big ones like Bruce Springsteen, the Rolling Stones, stuff like that. But I figured I'd do a little trick that Bob doesn't know we're going to do here. And I need a couple of you guys as an assistant, so if you two guys can kind of come right here on the end. And what I want you to do is you're going to grab just that very top edge right there and kind of hold your hand out flat. What? Nope, you're going to go this way, so we're going to grab the very, very bottom. Whoa. You're going to hold this, yep. And you're going to just kind of hold this, very slowly start going that way with it. This way? Yep. Oh, cool. We're going to keep going. Yeah, so this is what we're doing here. It's very slowly, very gently, because this is... So we're going to keep going here. Yeah, actually, might need some support in the middle here if you guys can kind of... We're going to keep going. No, we're going to keep going here. Jeez. I thought we were going to be done. No, we're going to keep going. So Bob didn't know I was going to do this. I'm still going, Bob, just so you know. Okay, so when I tell you guys what an honor you guys have to have somebody like Bob Clearmountain here to talk to you, and if anybody wants to just anywhere's on that list read out a big name, they start back all the way back, with Chic, Sister Sledge, all the way up through Nika Costa. We're going to talk about a little bit today. It is everything between In Excess. The list is endless of stuff. So with no further ado, and you guys can kind of keep that as party favors, I'm going to bring up Bob Clearmountain and Sergio, his apprentice.
Hi, everyone. Is that double spaced or single spaced?
I thought you'd like that.
That's funny. That's really funny.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of take you guys through a little journey with Bob. We're going to go right back to the beginning, work our way through. Obviously, with this much of a body of work, it's going to be impossible. And I would love to be here, and I'm sure a lot of you guys would love to be here and go over all these records. But we're going to kind of hit some key points of songs. We're going to talk about, what the business was like then, what the business is like now. We're going to go all the way up to what he's doing now, his studio. We're going to see Sergio here is been with Bob for 5 years. And I'm going to call Sergio an apprentice versus an assistant. And I kind of want to talk to Sergio a bit about how, what is it like to work with Bob, first off, and his interaction. Bob and Sergio both have a very strong affiliation with the Apogee Studios. So we'll talk about the relationship with that and Apogee gear overall. So if you guys are ready, I'm going to ask Bob his first question. Where did it all start?
Okay, well, I was a bass player, kind of not a great bass player, kind of mediocre, and in a band just as a teenager, and we were recording a demo in a studio called Media Sound in New York, and the lead singer was friends with this engineer named Michael DeLug at that studio, and so he was kind of producing our demo, and these two guys wrote songs together. So in the middle of doing the demo, after a couple of sessions, the band split up because hate to say this, but the guitar player was messing around with the lead singer's girlfriend.
Nobody's ever heard of that going on in rock bands.
And I thought, okay, enough of, I love musicians, but I'm not going to depend on them for my livelihood. So anyway, I started hanging around the studio and got to know everybody there. Michael DeLug became a good friend. And I kept coming back every couple of weeks and saying, you guys should hire me because I think I'll be good at this. I was always the guy in the band recording the rehearsals and the gigs on my little stereo reel-to-reel. And so finally they said, okay, come back in September. We're going to need somebody then. And you can start in the shipping department as a runner. Great, fantastic. So I come back, I report to the shipping department, and they send me off on a delivery. Okay, cool, this is cool. It's September in New York. I was having a great time. I'm going to learn about the city. I'll probably do this for 2-3 years. I come back, and the receptionist is, hey, are you that Clearmountain kid? I go, yeah. You better get up to the office. They're looking for you. They're looking all over for you. I go, oh, great. Well, my first day, I've been here an hour, and I'm going to get fired. I go up there, and they said, where have you been? I said, I went out in a delivery. Get down to Studio A. We don't need any delivery boys. We need an assistant. Because they had interns during the summer, and one of the interns was an assistant, and he left to go back to school. And, well, that was quick. So all of a sudden...
How old were you, Hen?
I was 19. And so I walk into Studio A, and my first session as an assistant engineer is Duke Ellington, which I don't know how many... Well, as people remember who Duke Ellington is.
I told you they were going to know you.
And I had never met anyone famous at 19 years old in my life, And so I was like, wow, this is scary. And not only that, but so the Duke is he's doing horn overdubs. He's got just a horn section. And he's yelling at the trumpet player. I'm going, wow, what's going on? The trumpet player showed up drunk to the session, so Duke is pissed off, and he's swearing at the guy. And I thought, so I'm 19 years old. So I didn't know, this is how naive I was and how times have changed. I didn't know famous people swore. Because on television, no, you never saw that. You never heard it,
Yeah, that's not the way it is for these guys now.
Yeah.
So the studio that you were at there, the room was a very, almost like churches, kind of big live space.
Yeah, one of them, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe explain a little bit about, the assistant's job back then. What was your real, were you setting up mics all the time? Were you, how much were you involved with the session? Yeah,
well, you'd set up the whole thing. The engineers rarely even went into the studio. You just set up all the mics, all the headphones and the music stands, and everything. The more progressive engineers would kind of help you in a little bit and say, oh, this is how I want stuff. But that studio was mostly jingles, and we did all the music, most of the music for Sesame Street. And but I tell you what, you learn, because you got to work really fast, and you got to set everything up in a half hour, and so it was good. And the jingle guys, they were just into impressing the clients. They would put a ton of reverb on everything, and everybody would be really happy. And I could actually put my own mics up, because they weren't usually concerned about the mics. And I'd try mics on different instruments.
Yeah,
I'd even sometimes recommend EQs to the engineers, and they would
maybe tell them a little bit about just not just that, but learning when you guys had, you were telling me earlier this story about the instruments just being around and what you guys did to try and figure out recording in general.
Well, because they did all this commercial stuff, there was a ton of instruments, or timpanis and xylophones and glockenspiels and you name it, every kind of instrument, clavinets, Fender Rhodes, Hammond B3, everything. But so me and some of the other guys in the studio, the assistants and engineers, we kind of formed a little band that we actually called the Bats. It was really just a studio workshop, and we never played any place because we sucked, to be honest. But so we'd go in on the weekends and we try every mic on every instrument and record our terrible songs. And it was just a great way to learn, and that's why I really enjoyed the little tour I got here this morning, and so saw how hands-on Full Sail is, because that's the important thing, that everybody gets to get their hands in there and try everything themselves, because you can just get so much from listening to somebody lecture you and watching other people do it. it's great when you can actually love the way you do it.
So let's kind of, most of the beginning of the sheet, as with most progressions of mix engineers, is there's a period of time where you're, assistant engineer, and then when did it move on to that recording process where you were going to be the engineer for the sessions?
Well, it went back and forth. They would sometimes early on give me the sort of COD sessions where they weren't too concerned. They weren't regular clients. But what really happened with me is that about 6 months after working there, I was booked on a session with a band called Kool and the Gang, and as the assistant. The engineer was a guy named Tony Bon Jovi, who, yes, is actually John's cousin. And
we'll bring him up in a little while.
As much as John would like to not be related to him, I think. But so he didn't show up for the session. I set it all up. It was a full band, the full rhythm section. I set it all up, and there's no engineer. And I had never actually recorded a full band yet in the studio. And so I just sat down and said, well, somebody's got to do it, and I'll just start doing it. And Ron Bell from Kool and the Gang, who was the main brains behind the band, just an incredible human, I think, really talented and great arranger and just a really fantastic guy. He comes in and listens to he said, let me hear what you got going. And he goes, yeah, great, that sounds good. Okay, let's go, And, other clients might have said, well, where's my engineer? Who are you? Give me the guy I asked for,
So, and that was a pretty long relationship with those guys as well.
Well, it did. Yeah, I did a bunch of records with them, and there was. And
I think that's an interesting thing about your career. If we look at that sheet, that's a very common theme with your career is your relationships with the artists that you work with. I mean, it'll go all the way forward from your work with the Stones, starting way back there. So you're recording now. You're an engineer, if you will. When does that really sink in, and what is the feeling of like, okay, I'm so busy, I'm driving the ship, what do I do, where do I go? New York is picking up at this point in time, I would assume, as well, musically.
Like what?
Well, I'm just saying, like, can you kind of, do you remember when you knew you were the engineer, you were the guy that people were coming after? Because that's a huge chunk of that beginning of your career.
It's funny because back then, the studios supplied the engineers. It's really different than it is now, where everybody's got their own guy. And in the few big studios that are still around. But yeah, and so I just figured, I'm just booked on these sessions, and it's the day job, kind of. It's a really great day job. But there was one day after actually I left media and went to a studio called Power Station. I was mixing something, and I asked the guy that I was mixing, the producer was there, and I said, oh, where are you from? He goes, I'm from California. I go, oh, so were you in town or you just happened to be in town? He goes, no, I came here to mix with you. And I went, wow, you flew all the way here just to mix with me? And that was like a shock to me. It's like, I can't believe this guy did this, I couldn't believe I was that important.
Yeah, and so you mentioned mixing. Like, did you? I mean, back in the day, obviously there was the recording, and mixing was more of a unified thing. A lot of the bands weren't, sending off to a separate mix, person at that point. Right. That was the late '70s and early '80s, was where that really became a profession in its own. Is that about the time you felt like you were like moving more towards mixing and less tracking?
Yeah.
And that was your desire, if you will? I mean, was that where your passion was in that process of it?
Well, when I first started, tracking was the thing that intrigued me, because I liked working with the musicians, and it was exciting to actually hear the creation of a recording. But then I discovered mixing actually it had to do with good automation, I think, because all of a sudden I realized I didn't need any, like, 4 other people to push faders. But back in the old days when there was no automation, you had to do it in real time, and you need a lot of help. But the automation meant that I could just do it myself, and I could actually listen to what I was mixing while I was mixing it, instead of just remembering moves. And so so that had a lot to do with it. And all of a sudden, I thought, this is the thing for me. I can be more creative doing this. Recording's interesting, but you had to be a producer to make it really interesting. I mean, I love the early days of recording, getting drum sounds, but some of it, recording a synthesizer, really is just a record button, and vocals are interesting, but you had to be a producer, and so I became a producer because I thought that's what I had to do. And then after producing about 25 records, I realized I hate doing this. I didn't like trying to get performances out of people, and I was always the guy. I was always like, at the end of the session, anybody want a rough mix? Because that's the part that I liked. And also, as a mixer, I worked with so many producers that were so much better than I was at producing. You know, people like Don Was and Tony Berg, and just a whole bunch of people that it's like, wow, these guys really know what they're doing. Well, who am I kidding?
Well, let's. So we're gonna maybe hit Good Times. You know.
Yeah. Here's a record, band called Chic. They were a very big sort of disco band, and they were the first clients at a new studio that we built called Power Station in New York.
So before we play this, let's talk a little bit about that, because you were integral in what became, for 2 decades, probably one of the premier studios in the world, definitely on the East Coast, and that you were a huge hand, even the construction, the rooms, and all of that, and and Tony was obviously a part of that. So maybe kind of taking them down the Power Station. Now, for you guys that don't know, which you probably don't, there's a studio in New York that was called Avatar for years that has recently closed down, and Berkeley has now purchased that and is historically renovating it, I think is the...
They're reopening it for a while, and then they're going to do a major renovation in about 6 or 8 months. That'll probably take a year.
And so maybe just go back to the beginning and then tell us, the cool little trivia thing about being the first one in the new space as well.
Yeah, well, Chic was our first project. In fact, it was so early on, the studio wasn't done yet, and we started it at Electric Lady Studios downtown in the Village. And so, let me think. Okay, so we finally got a window in the ISO booth next to the control room, and we finished their first album called, let's see, I forgot the name of the album, but it was a big album. And then the studio progressed. That record came out. It's a huge hit. There's a song called Everybody Dance was the first song that I mixed off that album. And then it was so funny because these guys were kind of these poor kids. And I remember seeing they had sweatshirts with holes in them, and, and then the next album, of course, they were wearing these Armani suits.
Disco was really big at this point in time.
Right. And they were doing really well. And so we did this album called Say Chic.
You recorded Good Times as well as mixed it, or?
Yeah. No,
so
then from then on, I recorded
everything that they were doing.
A couple albums. Then later on, I got busy with other things, and some other guys took over. But so okay, this is a song called Good Times, which some of you might remember.
Let's kind of go back in time, because the other thing, you guys are used to, how many tracks in Pro Tools do you guys have available to you? Unlimited, right? Horsepower now. So how many tracks did you guys have to do this?
Well, that would have been 24 track. Yeah, and that's it.
So maybe talk them through a little bit of that. When you have a song in a band, and you have big backgrounds, you have a lot of instrumentation, horn sections, live horn sections in this point in time. So how do you kind of plan for that? How was, and maybe, I don't know if you remember, did you have one, a bunch of people on mics and comp vocals? Did you put, 5 people on a mic? What was the,
First
process?
of all, you wouldn't have on the drum kit, you wouldn't have every drum on a separate track like you would nowadays, or every mic. You'd actually, while you're recording, mix the drums down to 4 tracks, let's say, usually. And then, let's see, the backing vocals, where there were 4 of them singing, and one of them being Luther Vandross. And I'd kind of record them on a stereo pair, really, just combining. So you're kind of combining as you're going when you're doing something like that. And then you can bounce tracks, of course.
Well, the commitment to the sound, I mean, that's something that even us now you lose a little bit of sight of that, because we can, have 80 tracks of vocals and then reblend whenever we feel like it, and do stems, and, so, when you listen to these records, and, the background vocals and that stuck out to me as, there's definitely a lot of people on a mic, which meant your singers were on. Maybe talk a little bit about musicianship.
Well, first of all, we had 4 mics, with 2 and 2 facing each other in a big ambient room. A lot of people like to put gobos around singers, and I always like to get the sound of the room in the mics. And if you listen to those records, there's very little reverb, if any, actually on the vocalist. It's mainly the ambience of the room that's getting in, in the compression, you get a bit more the more you compress. And I always liked that, and luckily, everybody else liked it too.
It turns into a thing. So this is around that same time where you start moving into, or actually it was probably pre this, when you started your relationship with the Rolling Stones. So maybe kind of tell us a little bit about how that transpired and what was kind of going on at that time.
Well, first of all, I grew up listening to rock music, So the R&B stuff I learned from Media Sound, because we did a lot of R&B records there. And so it was my whole training was a combination of rock and R&B, which I think turned out to be a good thing for me. And but because of Chic was on Atlantic Records, and there were a couple of like dance. We used to do dance mixes, which extended what they used to call them 12-inch mixes, because it was on a 12-inch disc, and for dance clubs, and it'd be like 7 or 8 minutes long. And so there was people at Atlantic that, the Stones had a song called Miss You, and they thought it was sort of a danceable type of song, and they wanted to get a dance remix of it. And so they suggested me because of Chic, and Chic were selling billions of records. And so they sent me this song Miss You, and I did a dance mix. Jagger really liked it. And so then he came over a few days later. He said, let's do a single version. And so that was the first time I got to meet Mick. And then it went on from there. So I did the single version and the 12-inch mix of Miss You. The one that's on the album, their producer, Chris Kimsey did, which is also really a great mix as well.
So the relationship with them continues, and we'll kind of jump forward and backwards with the Stones stuff, but this continued for decades. Most, and I'll not say most, but a lot of the Stones stuff is live stuff.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I do want to kind of talk to everybody about is the integration between being a studio engineer and then going out and not doing live sounds per se like a PA, but us recording and mixing and replicating a concert through speakers, if you can.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not that much different than studio stuff, really, except there's usually not as many instruments because there's no overdubs. The big difference, of course, is the audience. And that's a tricky thing to learn how to deal with because it's a fine line. You want to get as much audience reaction and sound of the hall as possible without getting it too muddy. And had a bunch of problems with video directors for some of the Stones concert videos, and they just want to hear the audience louder than anything. You know, there's more audience, more audience. And of course, you just turn up the audience so much, sometimes they're not making any sound. I mean, you go to a rock concert, and the audience isn't always cheering all the way through every song. But video directors seem to think that's true. And so you turn it up so much, and all you get is the PA mix, you know. So sometimes you have to add audience. So you'll take...
Did you ever do the tape loop in the control room?
No, I never did that. But what we'll do is we'll find a section, usually between just before the encore, where the audience is just going for it without any music or anything. And we'll take sections of that, swells in different bits, and we'll just plug them in between songs, or if there's supposed to be an audience reaction to a solo or something like that. And you just kind of creep a bit of that in there, here and there.
And career-wise, I mean, you know, when these guys are leaving here, you know, not everybody's going to work in a studio. Obviously, with the record sales industry being challenged at this point in time, you know, and bands spending more time touring and more time doing, you know, this live content. I mean, do you think this is something that is a valid career path to go down as doing this live stuff?
I think probably more so than doing studio records, because there's less and less. I mean, nobody has any money for, but people are touring more and more. I mean, there's certainly more. I think more touring now than there ever has been, because nobody can make any money off their records, and so they go out and play live. And so that's a better focus, I think, for people doing live stuff. I'm really lucky because I have some legacy artists that continually come back and can afford to pay me. I mean, even they can't pay what we used to get back in the 80s. It was a little obscene in the 80s, I think. Now it's about what it should be, probably.
Right. And so I want to circle back to that whole live thing, because I do want to talk about when you're recording something live. I definitely want to hit on, you know, converters and how we interact with, you know, whether it's a mobile truck or whether you're coming in and right now they're taking Dante or Matty or whatever, you know, and taking feeds. So I definitely want to circle back to that. But career-wise, let's kind of go back to that time where this guy named Bruce Springsteen starts to come into your life.
Right. Okay. Well, what happened there was I did an album with a guy named Ian Hunter. It was an English rock band called Mott the Hoople, and that came from working with a punk band called Tough Darts, because they were friends. And he came and helped them, and then he came in to do his album. He hired 3 guys in the E Street Band, Danny Federici, Gary Talent, and Max Weinberg, to be his backup band. And of course, the E Street Band and Bruce were used to working at a place called the Record Plant in New York, which is like recording in a closet. It was just this really dead studio.
For such a famous studio, too. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great studio, don't get me wrong, but it was that old style of everything's got to be really dead and isolated. And they would spend 2 weeks trying to get a drum sound, because the drums didn't resonate, nothing resonated. And so they came in a power station, and we spent maybe half an hour on the drum sound. I mean, it was just, you just push up the faders. It was such a big open room. It's this big high ceiling. And I put some room mics up. In fact, we hung room mics from the ceiling on a winch so that you could raise them up and down. And they just flipped. So they went back to, Bruce is about to start his album, The River. And he said, look, Bruce, you got to come over and try this studio out. So he came over, and we recorded and mixed the first song, which is a song called Roulette, and we did that in 2 days and finished it, mixed it. And of course, he never put that one on the album for whatever reason. I don't know why. But then they went on to do the rest of The River there. I handed it off to Neil Dorfsman, who was one of the other engineers and a good friend, because I was starting my production career, which was kind of
starting to be the producer.
Yeah, because I didn't, I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing. And
well, it's the natural progression. I mean,
yeah,
people assist, they
really
engineer,
is.
they mix, and then they produce, and sometimes even go on to label stuff from that point.
Yeah. And I don't want to discourage anyone from trying to be producers, because it's a great thing to do, you know, if you have that talent. I don't think I did. But yeah, so then they came back a few months later after they had recorded the album, and I mixed, I think, 11 or 12 songs. Only one of them they kept, which is Hungry Heart, which is the big single.
Do we have that, or can we? I'm going to see if Sergio can pull this up real quick, because the interesting thing about The River is the record has a live energy, a live feel to it. You know, and I mean, part of it's obviously part of the way they tracked it, the room. How much of that do you think you guys had to add at the end versus that was just the energy of the power station at that point?
Well, I mean, the only song I mixed was Hungry Heart. I mean, that kind of comes into play later with Born in the USA, which I did mix the whole album. But it's a very live-sounding studio, and so a lot of it is the sound of that studio, power station, you know. And ooh, that's interesting.
So he's just going to play a little bit of this.
Something else.
We were both thinking the exact same thing at the same
Darren
time.
just said his voice sounded so different. Well, the thing about that song is they very sped it, like, I think 5 dB, no, not dB, but 5
percent.
Beats from 5%.
Yeah, yeah. So
what
what he's talking about is on the analog tape machines, and we would even have to do this sometimes on the 2 tracks for radio or whatever it may be to crunch the song, but we'd literally speed up the song. So it changes the pitch and moves the pitch up on the song. So listening to that, I mean, I think we both kind of hit it at the same time, like how radically different. But that also, what about the reverb and the delay on there? Is that the stairwell? Is that the?
Well, the drums, that's that room. That's power station. That's the sound of sort of a bright, short ambience. The reverb is a live chamber that was in the basement. It was actually a bathroom that I found one day rooting through the basement of this big building. And I just said, what is this? And I cleaned it out. And there was some junk stored in there. And I stuck an old JBL 4311 speaker in there with a couple of AKG mics. And so that's all the reverb on that. It's also the reverb on another song we'll play in a little while. But then it's still a chamber there to this day. I think they're going to have to lose it when they do the renovations, unfortunately.
So I guess that also brings up the point of, you know, that drum sound not being processed, not having to, you know, go crazy with it. You know, recording the correct sound, the correct performance, like that all plays into how mixing the record is done as well. You know, the work, I mean, a modern record, and I'm just going to pick on the modern record and say, you know, there's so much post work that's done versus back then it was the pre-work, it was the rehearsal, it was the artists. I mean, where do you think we are from then to now, and what are you kind of seeing?
I think it's changed quite a bit, actually. Although I went back and mixed some of those early tracks recently, and I kind of mixed them the way I did back then. You know, I didn't really add a lot. I might have used a bass drum sample and just added in for a little more punch, but that's about it, you know. Later on, when we mixed Born in the USA, that album, which a lot of the tracks came from these same sessions, actually, we started using samples on the snare drum.
So maybe we play a little something. We're gonna play a little something from Born in the USA. We'll play that track.
Born down in a dead man's town, the
energy on the vocal is, you know, I mean, obviously Bruce is a very dynamic person, but, you know, from being a mixer, what you put onto that and was able to get that energy to come across, I think, you know, and maybe talk about that with, you know, this record, way different obviously than the other stuff. Like you said, you can hear the snare sample stuff, you can hear how you guys are moving, and that was the industry, the entire industry. But, you know, talk about, you know, mix technique maybe on this a little bit.
See if I can remember. That was a long time ago. But that's the way he sings. I mean, there's some tape slap. That's it. You know, I mean, we weren't using digital delays yet. I don't think we're still using like a tape recorder for delay. And Bruce was really into that. I was always fighting with him because I wanted to hear his voice without the effect, and he wanted more effect. And then he wanted the snare drum. I wouldn't have kind of gone over the top like that, but he really wanted the snare drum to sound like God was playing in it. So
and talk about that relationship of the artist. You're mixing the song, and you know your space, his space. You know, when do you listen? When do you not listen? When he goes to the bathroom or goes to have a drink, what do you change? You know, maybe talk to that really.
No. The thing is, my philosophy, and I think most mixers, most of my cohorts, you know, would say pretty much the same thing, that our job is to get into the artist or the producer's head, whoever you're working with, get into their head and find out what they're thinking. I mean, I'm performing a service for them. It's not my record. And if they're asking for a certain thing that sounds wrong to me, or think about why they're asking, there's probably a reason they want that. And it should be their vision. It's not my vision. And every record's going to be different. It's going to be according to the artist's, their thing. And so, okay, you take what they're saying and try to make that work. I mean, sometimes you can temper it a little bit and mix it with your own little thing. But it should basically be what they want. And sometimes you can improve on their vision. You might take their thing into an account, add some other stuff with it, just see what they like. If they don't like it, okay, fine. If they like it, then all the better.
And you're still doing Bruce stuff now?
What's that?
What's the last thing you did for Bruce?
It was just a couple of years ago in his last studio album. I mixed about half of it.
So you were mixing at your place and ISDNing to him. So maybe talk that through, because this is something that's coming into our business more and more, of us interacting with a client virtually as a mixer. So I think this is something that, you know, is probably a really good topic to kind of hit on a little bit while we're here.
Right. Well, ISDN is kind of a old technology now, but Bruce and I both have the same ISDN hookup. So, and ISDN is great because it's practically real time. It's like 150 millisecond delay. And I'm looking at him on FaceTime on my computer, and the delay kind of matches. So he can actually cue me for certain things. And he's in New Jersey, I'm in Los Angeles. And it's just a great way to work, to be honest, because he's actually got the same console as I have in his studio, and he's got the same speakers. It's almost identical. And so we can both sit between the speakers. If he was in my room, he'd be sitting between the speakers, and I'd be off to the left someplace.
Because the client rules.
Yeah, right. And so it's a great way to work. Plus the fact that Bruce likes to tell stories, which is fantastic. But when you're trying to get stuff done, it could go on. He could go on a bit, and you don't want to interrupt him because the stories are just amazing. I just saw him on Broadway, by the way, and unbelievable.
Really great.
Unbelievable, yeah. And
and I know you did that with Bruce. Are you finding that this is happening with other clients as well?
Yeah, well, usually we just stream over the internet, and there's a bunch of programs that do it. We use a thing called Nicecast, which just sits on our print rig, and that works great. Unfortunately, there could be anywhere from 4 to like 12-second delay, and so if you're talking to them on the phone, it's kind of, you'll say, okay, just stop it there, and you stop it, and it plays for another 10 seconds. I I've done tons of records, Bryan Adams records. I did a record with a band called Bare Naked Ladies, and they were all in Toronto at home, and they weren't even together. They were in a different homes. So they all would log on, and they'd be listening, and then they type comments into iMessage or whatever it is. Yeah, I think it was iMessage. And
so you're running interference while he's mixing, basically translating.
well, no, I'm actually reading it right off my computer. I'm just reading the comments, and one of them commented that it was like typing mixing commands into their Bob Clearmountain software. You know, because they'd type something in and I would do it. I would change it.
That's great. So, I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but so we go back to with your relationship with Bruce, and you know, again, this is a relationship like the Stones that just went on for years and years and years and years. What do you think is the bond? You know, because it's not just work, obviously. I mean, obviously the quality of your work, the way you hear things, you know, everybody in our industry already kind of has that established. But what do you think is why people come to you?
I think, as I was saying before, I think it's the way I interpret what they want. And a lot of times, I guess, because I've done it so much, I mean, I've been doing it for over 40 years. And
22 feet of it.
Yeah, right, there you go. I get to, you know, hear a piece of music, I'll put the tracks up, and I'll kind of get the vibe of it pretty quickly usually. I mean, there are times when I'm completely wrong, where in fact there was one thing with a band called Tears for Fears where the guy, the writer and main guy, Roland Orzabal, came in and it was a song called Sowing the Seeds of Love, and I worked on it for a couple of days. And he said, you know, there's absolutely nothing in that mix that is worth anything to me. And I was like, oh, uh-oh. And, well, what do you want to do? Could you point me in the right direction? So he tried. He wanted a little more reverb and this and that. And so I worked on it for another couple hours, and he goes, no, I don't think so. I go, all right, well, what do we do then? Am I fired? He goes, no, let's mix another song. He was incredibly professional, and he's just a great guy. And you know, he didn't just kick me out of the control room, which he could have. He said, let's try another song. And then we mixed 2 other songs in the album that he was quite happy with. And so,
and I think I can even see it in your face now. It's like that whole concept of not meeting that client's expectation bothers you. And I think maybe the commitment to that. And I think that is one of the things that's kind of lost now. I mean, everybody's trying to interject their own thing, you know, into everything. You know, even artists. I mean, everybody's an independent artist. Everybody's their own boss, and there is a little bit of that disconnect of, you know, what does the client want? You know, where's that at? So let's move from Bruce.
I think it's one of the reasons I wasn't a good producer, because
I would just your own opinion,
you know, I would just. Okay, what do you guys want to do? You know, tell me what you want.
Right, and they were looking for the direction.
Yeah, and maybe they could. Some of these bands could use direction, more firm direction, and I'm always like timid about.
Well, we talked a little bit about Hugh Padgham and, you know, him not being a musician, and him, like with Genesis and other things, just being a part of that creative process and helping guide the band and do that. But that's such a rare thing that a lot of these bands are looking for something more. And so people like us that really don't want to write their song or, you know, get in there and redo the arrangement, you know, it kind of leaves that void.
It worked out with me and Bryan Adams. We produced 4 albums together, and that was great because he liked the fact that I was mainly concerned with sounds. And then every now and then I would interject something about the arrangement. I would just say, look, don't you think this needs another section here or something like that? Like there's a song called Summer of '69, which we'll play. And if you, I don't want to play the whole thing, but I'm just going to say, there's one, it's a really minor little arrangement thing, and most people don't notice it, but it was one of those things that I actually got in there, that it's all, the whole first part of the lyric is about, you know, Summer of '69 and, you know, what was that like, and reminiscing, and these are the things. You know, Jody quit and somebody got married, and I don't know. And then there's the middle 8, and then after that it's like more current day. And so it's all guitars and drums and bass for the first part of the song. And then the current day part, of course, you were talking about early 80s, then a synthesizer appears.
Which is before you guys were born, we got that, but.
Yeah, then a synthesizer appears. And so all of a sudden becomes a more modern sound, and it kind of goes along with that. I always like doing that.
And this is
Having
also
something in the music that cues off the lyric.
This is a lot more produced record.
Yeah.
You're getting into, I know with your sound I mean, how much time are you guys taking to like this record? How long did you guys spend making it?
Long time. It took, a couple months. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll play quite a bit of this to kind of hear that.
For the whole album, not just that song.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got my first real six-string, bought it at the 5 and dime, played it till my fingers bled. Was the summer of '69. Me and some guys from school had a band and we tried real hard. Jimmy quit, Jody got married. I should've known we'd never get far. Oh, when I look back now, the summer seemed to last forever. And if I had the choice, yeah, I'd always wanna be there. Those were the best days of my life. Ain't no use in complaining when you got a job to do. Spend my evenings down at the drive-in, and that's when I met you, yeah. Standing on your mama's porch, you told me that you'd wait forever. Oh, when you held my hand, I knew that it was now or never. Those were the best days of my life. Oh yeah, back in the summer of '69. Man, we were killing time. We were young and restless. We needed to unwind. I guess nothing can last forever, no. Yeah. And now the times are changing.
So
Yeah, the whole synthesizer.
it's
A
great.
huge contribution.
So what's crazy is that while I was listening to that, I was thinking about some of the stuff that we teach about arrangement, and mixers have to bring this to the table as well. But the song has to move. There has to be new stuff introduced throughout that 3 minutes to keep
Right.
people stuck. So
That's true, yeah.
How could you kind of give them maybe some advice in that in the realm of the mix end, not so much the recording end, but in the mix end of making a song move?
Yeah, well, very often this happens to me all the time, where you get something and all the instruments are in from the beginning, and they just continue, throughout the thing. And very often, the best thing to do is, like in the first verse, take something out, take a keyboard out, or there'll be an extra guitar or something, and all of a sudden you go, oh. All of a sudden, I get the song now, because all of a sudden you're more focused on the lyric. So it's really good to create a focus by leaving things out. It's really helpful. And then okay, now everybody's familiar with the melody and the song. Now the second verse, you can start bringing those things back in. And then, of course, that's a pretty good arrangement, because the middle eight, all of a sudden these big guitars come in, so it goes up a notch. And then at the end, something else happens. And then sometimes it's great after the solo in the middle eight to just take everything out. Hip hop records do it all the time. They create focus by all of a sudden the drums will drop out, and You know, that's a really common thing with hip-hop records. And I love when they do that, when all of a sudden it's like real stark and you just hear the voice, you know.
Yeah, and then the whole track comes back in.
Yeah, right.
The thing I think is unique about, like, even listening to that song is the focus of, you know, the power of the drums. You know, the tamborine's on every off on that one, but the focus of how powerful the track is, but the vocal doesn't, you don't lose it. And I think that's a real tricky thing as a mix, especially with now the track counts that we're getting into and, you know, the kitchen sinks in there. But, you know, is there something you're doing to try and accommodate both of those? I mean, are you vocal first mixer? Are you track and then slide your vocals to it? Or are you kind of putting everything up as quickly as you can?
All right, well, this is something I was thinking about the other day. I've done quite a number of interviews, and one of the questions is always, okay, how do you build a mix? How do you start building your mix? And well, I think about building, and I think about like building a house, you know, or okay, you start with a foundation, which would be like the drums, and then you put the walls on it, which are like the guitars and the keyboards, and then the roof, which would be like the vocals, let's say. Well, like I don't do that. I don't actually build the mix. I just mix. And so what I'll usually start with a rough mix. So I'll put everything up. Of course, that won't work for a house, but it works really great for mixing music. I just start with a rough mix. I'll just put everything up, vocal loud. First of all, listen to the lyric, listen to what the singer's doing. Sometimes I'll even start with getting an effect or EQing the voice just to kind of guide the rest of the mix, because pop and rock records are mainly based around the vocal. I won't start with it. Once in a while I'll start with the drums, but it's really rare that I do that. I'll usually kind of work on guitars and keyboards and work on panning, even though panning's not really that important, but it's a good way to organize everything in your head as far as what balances out. Like, okay, put this guitar on the right, and then let's see, is there a keyboard or some other guitar that balances it out on the left? And it's a good way to familiarize, especially if you haven't heard the song before, to familiarize with all the ingredients. I think of everything in the mix almost like actors or characters in a play, you know, like a stage. Okay, where does this guy come in, and where does that guy come in, and where does this go out? And it's like a visual, more of a visual thing to me. And I've heard other mixers say a similar thing.
Yeah,
like
I know,
that.
absolutely. Do you feel like your stereo field? Because that's another big mixer question. Is, you know, you'll hear some guys that are only left, center, and right. You'll hear guys that are, oh, I want to be super symmetrical with my mix. I want to be, you know, I don't want that guitar hanging out left. And do you think there's a change in how you do it now with the huge influx of people listening to music on headphones? Because absolute left and right versus, you know, things bleeding over, I think is very different in how we perceive mixes.
Sure. I think it's all good, you know? I mean, sometimes it's just left, center, or right, depending on what the instruments are. A lot of times, if there's a lot of things, that they'll be different, you know, kind of spread them out, and won't be that stark. And then sometimes, like I'll do tricks, like the verse I'll just make mono, and then the chorus all of a sudden becomes stereo, things like that, depending on how the song is arranged. And that's to get the song to move again, right? That's because you want the song's not providing you contrast, so you're almost kind of creating contrast. Yeah, and I mean I love stereo. I must admit, it was one of the things when I first started listening to records. The first time I heard a stereo record, I thought, wow, there's something different coming out of there than what's over there. I just thought it was the coolest thing, and I still think it's cool. And but yeah, it's even if you end up with a mono mix in the end, it helps to think of the stereo. So just while I'm thinking about this, hearing protection, monitoring levels, like where are you at on that kind of stuff? Well, I rarely listen really loud. I never use like large control room monitors. I don't have any in my studio. You'll see, there's no big speakers. There's just the Yamahas and the BM15As. And is there a sub in the back? There is a sub, but I only
For
use
your
it for surround.
Yeah, okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah. I don't use it for the stereo. I know a lot of guys use my friend Chris Lord Algae uses Yamahas with a sub. And I went into his room once, and it was so funny because it's just this crazy amount of basses coming out of the Yamaha. I'm thinking, wow, what kind of Yamahas do you have?
Yeah.
And,
Have you been around Tom when he's mixing?
sub.
Tom is like turning it to 11 and hope
Well,
that it's...
I don't listen loud because the longer you listen loud, the shorter you can mix. There's that ear fatigue, which I'm sure you've been told and you've talked about. But
where do you feel like can you guys have a conversation over the level you're mixing, or are you're just above conversation level? Where do you feel like you're at?
I change it all the time. It's just constantly changed. I read an article in Tape Op this month about this guy says, oh, you should mix always at 83 dB. And because that's on the Fletcher Munson curve, that's the ideal volume.
I actually learned about that.
And okay, yeah, fine, except that a lot of people listen quietly, a lot of people listen loud. You can't ever predict, not everybody's going to listen at the ideal Fletcher Munson curve point. You know, it's so I'm constantly turning it up and down. Not only that, but you get less ear fatigue that way. You can listen for a longer period of time. It should sound good at any level. I have some different speakers. I actually have it. I have a stereo Sony TV for the SSL, and I've actually plugged the stereo bus into those speakers. So that's one of my pairs of speakers, which I love. Actually, they sound really good. Yeah. But it's not very loud. It's really quiet actually, but it's a whole totally different perspective, which is good.
Do you find yourself more on the BM15s, the powered monitors, than the NS10s? Is that something that's progressed, or?
I usually start on the NS10s, and I get to a certain point, and then I'll just switch back and forth. You know, so.
Are you referencing at all ever in headphones?
Occasionally I do. I had some Sennheiser 650s. I don't recommend Beats. You'll end up with... Even though Jimmy Iovine, who started the company, is a really close friend of mine, he knows that I wouldn't ever use them. But yeah, I would think you would end up with no bass if you mixed on Beats. But
well, yeah, I'm thinking just more referencing wise, you know, because a lot of the clients now, and that brings me to my next part, is when the client wants it and they're not linked into the mix and you have to send them a file, are you getting requests for, hey, just send me an MP3 to my phone so I can listen to it? Are you getting
sure,
that
all the
stuff?
time. Yeah, I know. In fact, I was mixing for a guy in England one time that kept asking me to turn the bass down. I go, okay, I'll turn. You want less bass? And to the point where I said, dude, I can't even hear the bass. Really? What are you listening on? What kind of speakers? He goes, well, I'm listening on headphones. And sure enough, it was Beats headphones. And I go, oh man, let's start over. And
so let's get back to the career a little bit. There's, you know, this mid 80s starting to go into the 90s stuff. I just was picking on Journey, Raised on Radio.
Okay.
I was just picking on it. He's not obviously a big fan of that one.
Sorry.
It's you know, it just has that very slick feel and stuff. So then we kind of moved into that 90s where everything started to become more organic. Does this, you know, was that something that you were, you know, after mixing so many records throughout the 80s and having such an influence on that, were people coming to you saying, hey, I want your old sound, or were they trying to get you to do the newer, more rock, more kind of like back to natural sound?
I never really thought about like a trend like that, really. It's just whatever it was, you know, and each project I look at individually. I don't think of it as an overall, oh, this is the trend or this is the style, you know. I mean, there are certain trends, like at one time everybody used a lot of reverb in the 80s, then it got really dry. The 90s actually got really dry, nobody's using reverb, and now it's back to like flooded with reverb. So there's some of that, and so you try to accommodate that. I mean, I still think that if something sounds like it should be dry, it just should be dry. If the client, they want the big washy sound, okay. I have certain ideas about about reverb, actually, that my personal feeling, and I'm not necessarily the reference on this, but it's just how I feel that if you have a lot of reverb on the voice, to have a dry rhythm track doesn't make any sense to me, because it just sounds like they're disconnected and in different places. And there's a lot of records that you hear that are like that. Look at this big washy reverb, and the drums are just dead dry, and close. It always confuses me to hear something like that. So I think they should be somehow
somehow. Do you use a lot of the
connected.
pre-delay and stuff in the reverb to get the reverb away from
Sometimes,
tracks?
yeah. It depends. Sometimes not. Sometimes, yeah. Yeah. I mean, generally, yeah, I'll put a bit of pre-delay in the verb.
So you moved from New York out to LA.
Yeah, in about the early 90s, yeah.
And you didn't start with having your own place. You were kind of working out of other commercial studios at that point?
No, it's really funny because when I got married, my friend Tony Berg, who's an amazing producer, he gave a little speech at the wedding, and because we've been friends for years and years, and he said, yeah, back in New York, he asked me if I ever wanted to have my own studio. I said, oh, I'd never want to bother with my own studio. Would you ever want to get married? No, I don't want to get married. Would you ever want to have kids? No, you wouldn't. Never want to have kids. Would you ever live in California? Oh my God, no, I wouldn't want to live in LA or California. And then there I was, living in California with a studio in my house, getting married with 2 stepkids.
So it's dream fulfilled, right?
So, it's amazing how your life changes sometimes.
Absolutely. So you had already. So when you went to LA, you kind of started this. Or?
Well, I lived in apartments for a while, and then I knew my wife. We weren't married yet, but we just thought we'd just go out on weekends looking at houses just for fun, because we were both in apartments, and then one day this thing turned up, and we were looking for something with a guest house for a studio. And this was actually like a rec room down in the basement, and it was the side of the house is open level to the ground because it's in a canyon, and so it's like a hill. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is big enough for a control room. And then I went into the little room next door, which is a utility room. Oh, this is big enough for a machine room. And then, because back then I had big tape machines, and then there was another little door that led to a long wine cellar. And I thought, this is great. First of all, I don't really drink much wine, and I could make this 2 echo chambers. And so we ended up 2 echo chambers. And if you get the Altiverb plug-in, they actually have my echo chambers in there as impulse responses. And it's like a short Motown kind of reverb, really bright and splashy.
And it has a very, you guys, if you go to mixthis.com,
Yeah.
and you can kind of look at it. It has a very open feel, kind of opens up to that pool, and has that comfort, kind of homey feel to it, which is, when you got a big SSL in your house, it's kind of, you tend to lose a little bit of that, but I feel like it, it does have that. So let's talk a little bit about Sergio. So I mentioned at the very beginning, apprentice versus assistant. Yeah. And I think there's a difference of, and Bob and I were talking about this a little while ago with Sergio as well, on, things being handed down from generation to generation. I mean, when we all came up, we had mentors that, whether it be a band, whether it be a producer, whether it be whatever, we kind of learned the ropes from somebody and moved on and moved on. And those days are definitely becoming way different. People like these guys are coming to school, and then when they graduate, expectations are on, that apprentice time. So Sergio's been with Bob for 5 years, you guys said? Yeah. So first off, what made you pick him?
Okay, well, Sergio, originally, you should say this. Why don't you talk about your own history?
Yeah, give him your background of where you came from and what happened.
Well, I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up there. I was a musician. I played guitar in bands in high school, all the way through my early 20s. I was in a couple touring bands. One of my bands got signed to a big label, and Bob ended up mixing that album for my band, and then the label dropped us, and then I had to kind of look for a job, and so I started working at an Apple store, and that turned into me working at Apogee, because Apogee was looking for a guitar player that knew Apple computers, that knew Logic, that knew how to record, and I kind of knew how to do all these things.
Can you talk a little bit about Apogee and how that studio is a little bit more unique than other places?
Yeah, well, the Apogee Studio is this, it's big, there's like this big live room, there's a stage, and there's this old Neve 8068 console in there from the 70s, from Power Station, actually. So when I walked in for my interview, that was the first thing they showed me, and I mean, you can imagine how I felt, because I had little experience in big studios, but this one was special. So yeah, they were looking for a sales guy, and I didn't know what that meant, you know, like they wanted an account manager, but they also wanted someone that played guitar, that was a musician that recorded. And so Jeremy was interviewing me. He was like, well, you know, I think we found the guy for the position, but maybe we could leverage you for your guitar playing skills. But it meant that I wasn't getting the job. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. And in the conference room, some of Bob's Platinum records are in there. And I had said something, and Jeremy was like, oh, that's Bob Clearmountain, you know, that's Betty's husband. And yeah. And I was like, yeah, I know, Bob mixed my band's record last year. And Jeremy was like, wait, what? And so he went and got Betty, the CEO. She came in, started.
That's my wife.
Yeah.
That's Bob's wife.
She asked me like 2 questions. She was like, okay, you're on. When can you start? And Jeremy was just like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll find something for you to do. And so that, with it, like the first week, they were like, can you go to AES? Can you go to New York? Because it was like September, and AES was coming up. I was like, oh, sure, okay. I had never traveled for work. I'd never had a full-time job at this point. And so I went, I did the booth. I did well, I guess. And I came back, and they sent me out to different stores, Apple stores and guitar centers, and I would bring my guitar and Apogee interfaces, and I would show people how to make music with interfaces. So that was kind of a cool job. And then my band got signed again, a different band, same singer, different band. We got signed, and we had to make a record, and so I asked them if I could use the Apogee Studio, and they were like, of course. So we had a producer, and you know, he kind of knew how to use the Neve, and so I watched him use the Neve, and I kind of fell in love with it. And he had to bail kind of halfway through the record, so I kind of had to finish a lot of like the last overdubs and stuff like that, just with the little bit that I knew. And I was addicted to it. And so like any opportunity I had, I would ask, can I use the studio? Could I use the studio? Could I use the studio? And they kept saying, yeah, yeah. And I would have different friends, different bands, different musicians from LA come in, and I would practice and practice. And then I think Brandon, who's Bob's former assistant.
Assistant who was with me for, this isn't before Sergio was with me for almost nearly 8 years, a guy named Brandon Duncan. And we actually built the studio together. He helped wire it and design helped design it. But so now I was looking for, he was moving on because he wanted to follow his own career, of course. And so we had to get an assistant, and so Betty suggested that Sergio do it, because she knew that he was really into the studio thing, probably more so than working at Apogee. And everybody at Apogee thought you weren't any good, and I thought, yeah, perfect choice. Sergio, first of all, he's a great guitar player, and so he's going to know music, and he's going to be able to edit, and he's going to, and he knows Logic, so he'll probably pick up Pro Tools pretty quick. And sure enough, he came in and picked up Pro Tools within a week. He was showing me. I've been using Pro Tools since '91. Yeah, and he's all of a sudden he was showing me all kinds of stuff that I never knew about Pro Tools, like right off the bat. So yeah, it worked out really well. It's really very, very quick too. I'm really slow at Pro Tools.
And now they're fighting about who gets them, what
Well, that's
time,
the
it's
thing.
shared custody.
Yeah, because when if I'm not have nothing to mix, he goes back to Apogee because they always have plenty of work for. He does all the in-house videos for the website and does the advertising stuff, and you see his face all over the website.
And so the concept of the long term, that's why I said apprentice versus assistant. I mean, I feel like assistant is, maybe whatever it is, maybe a year or two, and then you try and, move on to engineering or mixing or whatever. And so what keeps you, I mean, obviously it's Bob, I got that, but what keeps you, as the assistant, apprentice, / everything, I mean, obviously, even managing a lot of, stuff that's happening, and we had a lot of contact with you coming in, forwarding for what Bob's needs were and all this other stuff. And that's what keeps you grounded to that and makes you want to keep coming back every day?
Well, it's always a challenge. I mean, every project is a completely new experience, and there's something really cool about that. I mean, there's always work. It's just not something in my mind to just be like, okay, I'm out, I'm done. It's more like I'm just following what feels right, like whatever I have to do tomorrow, okay, that's what I have to do. Okay, this is what I have to do next week. This is what's on the schedule next month. And, at the same time, I'm like incorporating, freelance on top of that, right? So I am working like an excessive amount, but
So define an excessive amount for them.
Okay, well,
because they're coming. I mean, these guys are all, whether they're just starting here at Full Sail or they're getting ready to graduate, this month or next month. I mean, your excessive amount may be beyond what they're thinking. So why don't you?
Okay, well, let's see. A typical day would be like I wake up at 8, sit in traffic for an hour. You got to plan for traffic, and then get to Bob's studio. At 10, work. We have breakfast, which is
My
amazing.
mother-in-law makes an amazing French toast.
It's insane. It's always a good day when she does that. And then, so we work until about 6 or 7, depending on the workload, what we're working on. If we're working on a live
Could you explain about setting up the session?
Oh, sure, yeah. So, I mean, I'll set, depends on what we're working on, but I'll set up a session. It could be 100 tracks or something that are completely disorganized, or it could be something as simple as like a 24-track, 32-track session with all labeled nicely and arranged. It could be some live video that has all these edits that weren't done to the multi-track, and then I have to figure out how I'm gonna conform all that stuff later. And sometimes, a lot of times, I'll get things that I have no idea how I'm gonna do this. Like I've never done it before, but the only thing that has gotten me through it is just, okay, well, I've figured it out thus far, so I just kind of always have that like sense of confidence that, okay, whatever it is, like I'm just going to figure it out. I don't know how, but just being in it, you kind of figure things out. It's hard.
It's a 72 input SSL, but we really have 60 channels to work with because the rest of them are returns. And so he's got to, if it's a 100-track session, he's got to figure out somehow to get it all, do subgrouping and somehow some sort of logical, creative subgrouping to get it to all come up on the desk.
Do you have a, like, I know Chris has, his kick drum's always on the same channel, stuff. I mean, are you guys have a, if there's 10 kicks, they go down to these 2 tracks, or do you have anything like that?
The only thing that's actually consistent is the lead vocal's always at 24, which is the center of the desk. And I always like to have the vocal in the center. And then the rest of it changes, although drums are usually on the left, percussion's even farther to the left than bass, guitars. And then keyboards are usually to the right. If there's strings and horns, then they down there to the right. That's just,
and so he's submixing for you?
If we need it.
Right.
Hopefully the smaller sessions, you don't have to submix anything.
But when he's submixing for you, is it, I mean, are you prepping everything, submixing, getting it all set on the console, and you normally come in and you're good with the submix, or do you have to, like, I mean, is this a back and forth thing, or you kind of know where he's going?
I try to anticipate what, like, he's sitting at the desk, like where everything is. So I arrange things in a way, just from watching him do it for so long, what he might need or want. But I always leave it, and I try to leave it in a way that he's going to be able to change it. Like if I do a sub-mix of background vocals, if I have to do it myself, then I make sure to that he knows that he can adjust it, right? If the high harmony's too high at some point, then it's right here,
Yeah, if it's not right, I make him wash my car.
I knew there had to be a contingency plan there somewhere. So after you've kind of got your 6, 7 o'clock Bob day, so where do you go from there?
So then I'll go. I try.
Is that pretty typical? Or is it pretty typical for you to kind of that 10 to 6 kind of time frame?
10 to 7, 10 to dinner.
Yeah.
That's that.
But you're
that's
not
it.
I'm going to mix at 3 in the morning all
Not
night
anymore.
long. Yeah.
Used to be, at one time. No, one day, my wife Betty said, "Look, why don't you just stop at dinner? Do you really have to mix until 11 o'clock at night?" Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll just stop at dinner, and nobody's complained. It's been fine.
So you're done with Bob, and
Then
how
I'll go
much
to Apogee.
after Bob's done work do you have?
I usually have to do deliverables and stuff, but at first it took me a long time to get to this speed that I can do things. I can do a lot of things at one time, and I can be working on deliverables of stuff as I'm helping Bob, as I'm doing edits, and doing the recall sheets and answering phones. I don't know, I can do kind of a lot of things all at once. So, I don't know, like 30 minutes, an hour. It totally depends on the session, but typically, we're done mixing, I shut everything down, and then I go to Apogee. If I have another session and stuff, which has been more frequent, and I'll drive to Apogee, which is like a 10, 15-minute drive to Santa Monica, and then I'll be there till 2 a.m. just working on anything.
How many days a week are you doing it?
I try to keep it at 2 days, sometimes 3 if I have
At
more-
Apogee?
At Apogee, yeah, 2 nights or 3 nights a
You
week.
guys are 5 days a week? You
Yeah,
guys-
pretty much 5
Mhm.
days.
And then sometimes on the weekend if it's like a good project.
And
you know.
deadline. Yeah, some of these video projects take, a little longer, and they have deadlines.
Mhm. But yeah, that's kind of a typical, the 2 to 3 nights
14,
a week.
16-hour days aren't uncommon in your world.
No, I would do it more, except I have a family, so it's important for me to be home as well.
Between the 3 a.m. and 8?
Mm-hmm.
Just picking on.
Yeah.
That's family time. So let's talk a little bit about the studio and the setup, because these guys have a kind of a cool setup, and something that Bob does that I know from a ton of mixed friends as well is not done, that you're doing, that we're all envious of you doing, which is from a long time ago, Bob, every mix that Bob does, he prints down in surround.
Yeah, right.
Mind-boggling to me, but to think about all the stuff that you'd have to go back to do that Bob has done already. So maybe let's, if Adam or whoever in video can throw up the graphic of the layout of the actual Pro Tools rigs and his ins and outs of the console, and maybe
Yeah,
talk
well,
about the surround thing a bit.
I think you had that on there, I think.
I think we have a graphic up there. They'll throw it up in video here in
Okay.
a sec. But let's talk about the mixing and surround.
Well,
Because
yeah.
you're doing full mixing and surround. You're not just doing fold downs.
No, not fold downs ever. I'm quite anti fold downs, but unless absolutely necessary. But it goes back to when surround, like 15 years ago, I think it was a big thing for about a minute. Well, it goes back to my wife said you should be mixing surround, and I'm like, oh my God, really? Oh, what a pain.
One of those things he would never do.
Yeah, exactly. One of those things I would never do.
Quad kind of spoiled it for you.
Yeah, but then one night I woke up in the middle of the night and said, wait a minute. I think I know how I could do this. And I was thinking about the SSL, and I could use the bus routing switches for buses. And then I figured out a way to actually create a surround compressor, because that's part of the thing. I use the bus compressor in the 4K for part of my sound, really. And how would I do that for 6 channels? And so I figured out the SSL actually has 4 stereo extra VCAs with faders that you can just, they're patchable VCAs. So I figured out that I could slave them off of the main stereo compressor, and then I could just patch my surround buses just through there, and it disconnects from the faders. So I can still use the faders as soft groups. And so I still have like 12 groups. And it works perfectly. They just follow, because as long as I have a stereo mix going through the stereo compressor, the surround compressor just mimics that. It just does exactly the same thing.
Are you VCA-based automation, or are you Ultimation?
It's Ultimation, but I don't use the moving faders.
Okay. So Ultimation, just so you guys know, is the moving fader for SSL, but pre that, you would have automation, but you wouldn't see the actual fader move itself.
Yeah. And so with the Ultimation, you can turn the motors off. And I've always said, if the fader's going to move, I want it to be the one moving it. And so I know what I did, so I don't have to see them actually moving. And not only that, but on the Ultimation, they don't work very well. That's the main thing. About a third of them barely work. And so, but the VCAs work perfectly. But anyway, yeah, so that's sort of the layout there. The signal flow.
So what's kind of unique, Sergio? I don't know, whichever one of you wants to talk kind of through it, because you run 2 Pro Tools rigs, which is another unique thing to what you guys are doing.
I have a separate print rig, which is always 8 channels every pass, because it's stereo and then 6 channels surround. And
so maybe let's start the beginning food chain there.
That's a good thing, because it keeps
playback deck.
Sample rates are all different. The projects that come in are, I know it could be 40/1, it could be 48, 88.2, who knows? But everything goes out at 96, and they're locked together with the Big Ben through video sync. The print rig is locked with video sync. The multi-track rig is locked with word clock off the Apogee Big Ben. So everything's like it's one machine, but
so you have the main Pro Tools rig Sergio has prepped. He's got already, and that feeds into your SSL. And then you're then sending to all your monitors and coming back down to your output interfaces.
Yeah.
And then that's feeding your separate print rig.
Right.
Did you already say what sample rate you were doing your print rig at?
96.
96.
Yeah, everything goes out at 96.
So your surround monitoring, how often do you flip from your stereo mix to that surround to reference between the two?
Well, most of the mix I just do in stereo. And so kind of as I'm going through, I'll think, oh, this instrument might be good in the right rear, or this might be good in the, usually the vocal's pretty much center with a little bit in the left and right. And so I'll kind of assign those speakers as I'm mixing the stereo. And then at some point, when I finally have the final stereo mix, I'll go back and listen to it, and then I might make some adjustments. And the small fader on the SSL is post main fader send to the routing, so that I can make little volume adjustments. Sometimes some of the stuff in the back should be a little louder because there's less stuff back there. And then I have a 4-channel return, echo return, and the rear channels are actually like 3 dB more, because there's more room for ambience.
Are you using surround reverbs?
Yeah. Altiverb has a lot of surround reverbs.
Yeah, Altiverb's crazy good. So after you guys get this done, you're gonna then, Bob's done mixing, you're gonna print stuff down. And then how has the stemming process, because everybody now wants stems, whether they're touring or want their backgrounds or whatever. So you get the list of deliverables from the label of, let's have it 55 ways.
I hate that. I try not to, I try to discourage it, but yeah, more and more that happens. And so Sergio's basically in charge of
Talk them through that a little bit about what you're getting from labels. What are you seeing? What's,
First, we should say that every mix gets a vocal up, a vocal down, and you probably know this already, a a TV track with backing vocals, no lead vocal, an instrumental, no vocals, of course, and an a cappella, just vocals.
Yeah, the RA people, you'll get that towards the end when you get closer to mastering. We talk about all the deliverables and that. Are you doing plus 1 dB, plus 2? What is it?
Plus and minus a half on the
Okay.
vocals.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's it. So he'll finish a mix, and then I'll go back to the beginning of the mix, set up the 2 rigs so that they sync up with each other. So when I hit play on the SSL, the multi-track starts playing, Pro Tools multi-track starts playing, and it triggers the print rig Pro Tools to start recording at the exact same time code. I'll give myself a few seconds of pre-roll. I'll slate it, right, just in case the audio file name gets lost. You can listen to what mix it is, right? So if it's Hungry Heart mix 5, and then it starts recording a few seconds later, and then I do the vocal up a half dB, the vocals down a half dB, TV track, instrumental, a cappella, and then I'll send a reference mix as well, usually at a smaller resolution. If it's a 96K print, then I'll send a 48K reference file, sometimes an AAC if they have bad internet, sometimes both. Or I'll upload it to our FTP so that people can download it. That's pretty standard.
Yeah. And then if they ask for stems, which I try to discourage, but some people insist on it, especially more the English bands really insist on it, seems like. So then he'll do like a drum stem, percussion stem, probably bass and guitars,
it's the same
keyboards.
Process. It's the same process, just
So
solo.
no offline bounds.
No, there's not.
That was
not
a little
possible.
joke because they're running analog. I'm sure you would love that, huh? All right, so what I like to do is, I mean, we could talk about records and gear and all that stuff all day long, but I want to get to some questions from you guys. So we're going to form a nice line of people that want to ask Bob or Sergio questions at the microphone, and please remember to speak into the microphone. Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
I just wanted to ask, that's way louder than I thought. How old were you when you got married?
Old?
How old were you when you got married?
That's funny. Let me think. I think I was 40. Yeah, or 41, something like that, yeah.
Okay. And also, Sergio,
Yeah,
I was wondering, how old are you?
I'm 31.
Oh, wow. Really? Yeah. Baby face. Well, I think we all wish we were in your position right now.
Thanks, man.
You guys seem like nice people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a random question. Do you cut unnecessary frequencies with an EQ on every single track that you record?
No, not
No?
on every track.
Okay.
I mean, I usually have a high pass on vocals, generally.
Okay.
And then it just depends, you know. I mean, a lot of, it's interesting that you ask about that because I find a lot of keyboards have extra bottom end, you know. Sometimes guitars do, and I notice you'll hear the bass will sound muddy. It's like, why does that bass sound? You solo it, well, that sounds okay when I solo it. When I put it in the mix, it sounds all muddy. Go through other instruments without the bass, turning the bass off, and find out there's probably mud coming from somewhere else. And then, yeah, you can stick in a high pass and get rid of some of the stuff that's conflicting. Usually you don't need it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
As a vocalist, often I struggle with people wanting me to sound different on their tracks, obviously. Do vocalists send you like a preset or an idea of how they want to be mixed for the vocals, or is it just kind of up to you and they trust you?
Sometimes they do. Usually not. But yeah, occasionally they'll send like there'll be a reference track with a delay or something. A couple times I got tracks where there was a delay printed on the vocal track without one was clean, and I've had to ask them to actually send it without the delay because it's really awkward to mix. And I'll duplicate whatever delay they had, but in a way that's a little more manageable in the mix.
Thank
Hey, I just wanted to ask. A lot of times we live in an age where a lot of times artists don't know exactly what their engineers do. So how do you deal with those discrepancies between what the artist is asking for and what you actually do?
Well, that's just the experience of mixing. You know, you kind of get to know when somebody asks for something. A lot of times they don't. You're right. They don't necessarily understand the technology. They don't know. Oh, you know, I want more. I want 3D be more 10K on a shelf. You know, but you kind of have to suss out, and that just comes with experience from doing it and saying, oh, do you mean this? And they'll go, oh, no, that's not what I'm talking about. And oh, well, you try different things until, yeah, that's it. That sounds great, you know. And the more you do that, the more you'll learn when somebody asks for a certain kind of thing, what to give them. And it just comes after a while. And you don't always get it. Even sometimes I get totally mystified by things that people are asking. But I'm a little better at it than I was 30 years ago, I hope.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. I'm going to try not to ask a dumb question right in front of my teacher this month. So,
Dumb questions
There
are
are no
good.
dumb questions.
we're tracking a band this month, and I just wanted to ask you, what's your method on trying to get a performance out of them if they're kind of like struggling? Like they know the song really well, but we need them to like get to that next level. And I know it's not an easy question, but I'm sure there's been a time where you had that scenario. How did you handle it?
Well, this is one of the reasons I don't like producing, because there are guys that are really good at that. And I can tell you what not to do. Don't yell at them and tell them that they suck, you know, because I worked with a producer that used to do that, and that's definitely the wrong approach. But encourage, just get them to try different things, I think, and you know, maybe if there's a certain thing that you have in mind that's similar to a record that you know, maybe pull it out and play some examples. Say, look, let's try to go in this direction and see if they can. I mean, back when I used to produce it, there's been times where I've actually written the drum parts. I've stood out there with the drummer and told him what beats to play. I mean, I hate doing that, you know. Hopefully your drummer can suss that out.
That's what we're hoping for. Thank you.
Hey, what's up?
Hi.
You've worked with Bryan Adams, Bruce, and Jagger. You've worked with a lot of successful artists. My question is, what did all those artists have in common? What made them different?
What did they have in common, and what made them different?
Yeah.
Well, what they had in common was an instinct, I think, for what they did, and obviously the talent that they had. I mean, those three people that you mentioned they're incredible singers, and they're incredibly insightful, great writers. What was different was they all have different temperaments. They're all really nice people and good people, you know, and experienced, and they wouldn't get mad about stupid things. You know what I mean? There's people. I think they're all they have a sense of security. I think the people that are hard to work with are the ones that are insecure about what they do. I think, and those people have gotten past that. Let me put it that way. Oh yeah, David Bowie, that was a good one. I should play some of that, but.
I'll just stay right there, and maybe we'll play a little bit of that.
Heck yeah, I like standing here.
This is a great thing for me. This is a wonderful experience making this record.
blues and dance the blues. Let's dance to the song they're playing on the radio. Let's sway while color lights up your face.
All right, now this guy was just the most unbelievably talented person I've ever met. You know, probably him and Bruce. And, but he had something very, very special. Because the first song on this album was called Modern Love, and it was the first thing that we did vocals for. And it was just he and I in the room when he came in to sing it. And the first, if you're familiar with Bowie at all, he's got a couple different voices that he does. And this sort of voice is sort of deep, thick voice that with the vibrato and everything. He sang Modern Love that way the first time. And he sang a verse and a chorus, and then he's out there in the studio with the headphones, and he stops me. He goes, "Okay, just play that bit back for me." And I played it back, and he's listening to it, and he stops at the end, the first chorus. He goes, "Oh, let me think a minute. Hang on." He goes, "Okay, yeah, let's just do it again." And then he sang it up. If you know the song, he sings it up an octave. It's like a different person walked into the room, started singing. And it was like a whole different character. And first verse, first chorus, "All right, play that back for me." Played it back, he goes, yeah, that's a lot better. "Okay, just punch me in from there." Finished the song, doubled it, and that was it. That was the vocal, no other takes. I mean, this is what this guy brought, you know. That's a talent I've never seen from anybody that could do something like that. I mean, these guys, they're all individually incredible, and I'm like the luckiest guy in the world to be able to work with people like that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Just for a short answer to your question.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me stand here and stuff.
So my question is for Sergio. As someone who was in a band and successfully signed to a label, do you have any advice for an up-and-coming band?
Be nice.
Up-and-coming band, oh gosh. Don't sleep with each other's girlfriends. I don't know. Gosh, man, if I was in a successful rock band, I would know how to answer that. But I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out myself.
Okay. Well, thanks anyways.
Hi, my name's Edwin. Thank you so much for coming out and giving us your insight. Just thank you so much. My question is, what can we all do now to become what you have been doing for the past 40 years? What can we do actively?
That's a big question. Things are so different now, I mean, to be honest, than when I started. I mean, to be honest, I was really lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, and it was all I knew how to do. Like, I can't really do anything else. So that's one thing, is be focused. You know, if you're trying to do a lot of different things, if you're trying to do this and do 5 other things, and I don't even know what you could be into post-production, you could be into making records, into live sound, but pick the one thing and just go with that and concentrate on it, and don't be distracted by other stuff. I mean, it's just that focus of and that drive of just wanting to be good, and don't let anything get in your way, and you know, don't get discouraged.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and talking to all of us. It means so much to all of us.
I'm so glad. Thank you. That means a lot to me that you said that, actually.
Hello. I was wondering, do you use mostly outboard gear or plugins?
Mostly outboard gear.
All right, what are a few standards that you use in most of your mixes?
Of the outboard gear, or?
Yeah, either.
Well, plugins I use Alta for reverb, but I use it as an outboard. So I take it off an aux off my SSL back into the computer and then back into returns. I use for another plugin. Oh, this is something sort of interesting. I know you guys teach Melodyne and Auto-Tune. Well, I don't use either of those. And of course, every singer I work with sings perfectly in tune, so I wouldn't actually ever. But
Heard the record, yeah.
yeah, but if I ever need it, there's a Waves plugin that's part of one of their packages called Sound Shifter Pitch, which is really just a pitch shifter. It doesn't do anything automatic, doesn't do anything like Melodyne or Auto-Tune. It's just a basic pitch shifter with manual. And so I just automate that. I do it totally by ear. I don't know if anybody else does this, but I've always done it by ear. I used to do it with an Eventide harmonizer back in the day. And it's just really fast for me. You know, I think if everybody tried it, they'd realize most people have pretty good relative pitch. You don't have to have perfect pitch. You just have to pretty good, you have to know when something sounds out of tune. And which is why you do it anyway, because, wow, that sounds out of tune. And, but I don't know, I would recommend trying it. Like I say, I don't know anybody else that does that, but it works really well and very quick. But then the outboard gear, let me see, is there a picture? I have LA3As for compression. I go between them and I use 1178s as opposed to 1176s, mainly because you can fit two in the space of one. And they're really handy because of the stereo mode. I use them for like on tom-toms and things like that. And they sound every bit as good as the 1176s to me. I use Pultec EQP 1A3s, which in fact I just bought 2 of the reissues. And what else? Yeah, the distressors are fantastic. Everybody probably knows them. They're just they're great for acoustic guitars and guitars in general. Let me see. I have some digital delays. I have a Yamaha D5000, which not many people know about. It's just a great box for a digital delay. The Roland SD3000s.
Of course, the Apogee gear.
The Apogee gear, of course, is the most important thing to me. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have a place to sleep. No, I'm just kidding about that. But yeah, no, it makes a big difference because it's all Apogee converters in and out, and just stereo, you don't really notice much of a difference. But when you get 60 or 70 channels coming back at you, it really does make a pretty big difference when you're doing a mix. Yeah, the clocking. Yeah, clocking's important. You just mentioned clocking. Of course, everything's clocked off that's not there anymore. The Apogee Big Bend, which really helps. It lowers jitter and just makes everything sound better. And so yeah, the Apogee gear. There's a great little new device here by Apogee called the Elements, and I'm glad you asked that actually, because this is something that's been overlooked for some reason. These products is a 2x4, a 4x6, and an 8x8, and they're really ugly. It just looks like a stage box. It doesn't look like anything. And the idea of it is that they took the knobs, buttons, and meters, which cost extra. They took them out, and it has none of that. All that's in the box. So it's got there's a thing called a Symphony remote that goes with that, or is that what it's called?
Apogee remote.
Apogee remote, yeah. It's all software. It's like a plug-in in your computer, and so so all the controls are in the computer where you're sitting. And most people that mix in the box, why pay for all this extra hardware on the box when you could just have it all right in front of you in the computer and it costs less? And it's just they put all the money into making it sound better than anything else. I mean, they're really super high quality. So, yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Hello, thank you for coming, obviously. I have two questions. So obviously, I know you've probably worked on millions or thousands of songs. How do you know when to decipher between a song that goes on an album and when that's just like a song that you really like, but you know it shouldn't be on an album? And then when do you know when to work for money when you don't love what you're putting out, but of course you have to make a living? So I guess I'm asking, like, when do you know how to work for money but not love what you're working for, if that makes sense?
Okay, the first question is not something that I really ever have to answer because it's more, that's up to the artist, what he puts on the record, and his producer, and if there's a label involved, they're quite involved in that. I mean, there's been songs that I thought should come off records because I thought they were terrible, and the label put them on anyway for whatever reason, and vice versa. You know, I thought there was songs that were great that never got released as singles. But, as far as getting paid for stuff, let me see. Wait, what was that second question again? Give me that.
Like, because when I work at something, like, I don't like working if I don't believe in what I'm working for.
Right.
So like, but I have to make a living, obviously,
Yeah.
off of what I'm doing. So how do you know when to just like push that loving of something and work for money?
Well, I mix all kinds of stuff that that I wouldn't buy.
Okay.
Right. That I don't necessarily love. I mean, I rarely, luckily nowadays, I don't have to do anything that I absolutely hate, or really rarely. No, practically never. There's always something that I can get out of it. I mix a whole lot of French artists, and I don't speak French, but they're all pretty good. And the music is well recorded, and it's well arranged, and the songs, I can tell the songs are good even though I don't know what they're saying. The melodies are good, and so that's okay. But
Maybe Sergio, can you?
Yeah, I had something in mind. I think that, I mean, you have to work, right? You have to make money.
to work. Yeah.
So I think that you can learn to find the opportunity in whatever it is that you're working on. You know, find the passion in there somehow. Invent something. Or find a way to make it great in your own way. You know.
Yeah, exactly. You can get something out of, even if you hate it, there'll be something in there that you can get out of it. If it's not just the cash.
Yeah, experimentation. Like if I'm working on a project that I'm just like not too thrilled about, I'll experiment. You know, like really experiment.
All right.
You know, like
Maybe you can turn it into something good.
yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Jesse, and first off, I read that you're from Connecticut, and I wanted to know what part, because I'm from there.
From Greenwich.
Greenwich, wow, yeah. I'm from Newtown.
Oh yeah,
So
great.
it's nice to know.
Hometown folk.
Yeah. So I just want to know, you said you were a bass player, and you started out as a bass player first, and I noticed that a lot of songs that that were played here have really like prominent bass lines, and they're really recognizable, like "Miss You" by the Stones. And I wanted to know what your experience playing bass played a part in your mixing and producing.
I think quite a bit. I think there's something, especially the R&B stuff, you know. I think it's something because I'm always listening to the bass, and it's a big thing. In fact, there's a sort of an interesting story. That song, Good Times by Chic. I remember when we cut the track, okay, the producers, everybody's in the studio. They're all in the band, and it's basically a live band. And so they come in to listen back, and I'm going, that's one of the coolest bass lines I've ever heard in a pop record or in a disco, in any record. I just was so impressed by what Bernard Edwards played. And so he comes in, and we're playing it back, and I'm sitting at the Neve, and he's standing next to me. And I turn to him, and I just go, where the hell did you come up with that bass part? It's unbelievable. And he looks at me and goes, oh, really? You like that? Like he didn't know, you know? This guy was so humble. And I was like, like that. It's a, you know, this is classic. I mean, I just knew it was, just because of the bass part, I knew it was a hit record, and it was huge. Yeah, so yeah, it does come in plus the fact I play bass at the Apogee band at Christmas time for the Christmas party. Me and Sergio plays guitar. And
Oh, wow. So when you're mixing though, do you have any specific things that you do in relation to the bass, since you do have that experience too?
Let's see, there's a couple of things. Sometimes I try to make sure that the sound of the bass drum mixes with the bass. Sometimes I'll use a sample maybe, or I'll EQ it a certain way, just so that it sounds like one thing. Or if it's a little out of time, we might fix the bass so it's a little more in time with the bass, especially on live stuff. Sometimes, you know, obviously the bass player might be wandering off the side of the stage, and you know he's here, and we'll just kind of tighten it up a little bit. Things like that. Usually you'll get a DI and a mic and an amp. And I find quite often the amp is just a few samples late, you know, maybe 90 degrees out of phase, kind of. So we'll just kind of pull it up a little bit so that the waveforms match, and it kind of makes it sound better, makes it sound smoother.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Raise this up a little bit. How you doing? I'm Rami.
Hi.
Thank you for coming out. Speaking of Chic, I just wanted to ask if you still keep in touch with Nile Rodgers and have worked on anything recently with him.
I haven't worked on anything, but I just saw him last week. Actually, Power Station is reopening because Berklee School of Music just bought it, and along with some grants from the city, and they had a big party, a reopening party, and Nile was there. So I saw him briefly, said hello.
Did he produce the David Bowie Let's Dance?
He produced that, yeah.
And you mixed that?
And I recorded and mixed it.
Super cool.
And you probably notice, if you don't, I'm sure you're all familiar with Get Lucky, the Daft Punk record.
Yep.
Notice basically the very similar guitar.
Yeah.
That's Nile, you know. You can't mistake his playing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, you mentioned that like you got your start in New York and you made a vow that you wouldn't move to LA, which is something that I've kind of made myself. I'm a very avid New Yorker, and I'm just wondering, like, is it worth trying to stay in New York? Because I feel like a lot of people do end up moving out to LA, and it's just kind of like, how did you convince yourself to do that?
It depends on what you're doing, I think. If you're recording jingles or in the film business maybe, or television, then New York's a pretty good place. Or if you're doing hip hop, there's a huge hip hop industry in New York. I think if you're more into rock or maybe movies, LA's going to be better. For me, it was, let's see, I worked in New York, you know, all through the 70s and most of the 80s. And then for some reason, my business has dropped off. It was, I was going between London and LA. And I finally realized, then it started to drop off in London. And I ended up in LA most of the time. And I had an apartment in New York and a house upstate. And, well, this is ridiculous. You know, I'm spending money on mortgages and I never even go there. And so I just settled in LA. Plus I met my wife there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, me again.
Hi.
I want to redeem my last question. Looking at this long list here, I'm assuming there's not a lot of people you haven't worked with.
There's a few.
And that's going to actually be my question. So if there's an album that you heard or a song or something in particular that you wanted to go back and put your hands on and actually mix it your way, is there a specific one that comes to mind?
Well, that Daft Punk record, I think I could have done it. I mean, Mick Guzowski's a friend of mine. He's a great guy, and it's a great mixer. But I think I could have done a better job with it and made it sound more like the Chic records. I think it should have sounded like the Chic records.
Specifically, like what are the specifics within that sonically that you wanted to bring out?
Just the way that the punch of the drums, and it just doesn't seem to. It's a great record, don't get me wrong, and he did a great job, but there's just something missing about the feel of the mix for me.
Okay.
I think if you compare some of the Chic records to that, I think maybe you might hear it. I don't know.
Well, I'll have to go back and listen to it then.
Yeah.
I liked it, but I'd like to hear your version.
I would too.
Get your hands on those stems.
Yeah, but don't tell Mick that I think he did a good mix.
He's not going to listen to me, but yeah, okay. Thank you.
Because he's really a good guy. He's good, very talented.
Hello, my name is Jennifer, and I just have one question. So when you started, since you started, since you first started mixing compared to how you're mixing now, do you feel like there's some elements that you now changed, or you go about mixing different things different ways when you started?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. I haven't changed radically, but certain things like really specific things, like I do a parallel compression on the snare drum most of the time, and let me think. I probably mix drier than I used to. I don't know. Hopefully I'm better than I was. That's that's the only thing. I just hope I've gotten better, and I think I have. Sometimes I think I have. Sometimes I go back and listen to stuff that I did in the '80s, and either like, wow, that was pretty good, or did I do that? Oh my God. There was one time, couple times this has happened where things have come on the radio and I didn't recognize the song right away, and I thought, well, what idiot mixed that? And then I realized, oh yeah, it was me.
We're also going to, after we finish this little row of questions here, we'll kind of cut off the questions and we're going to talk about Nico a little bit. And it's a more modern Bob. That's why I wanted to kind of close with that artist. It's I think maybe going to answer a little bit of your question, because after the stuff we've heard compared to her record, this is definitely
Really
a different
different.
evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a.
We'll come. Let's get these guys, and then we'll come right to
great.
that and end on
Okay,
that
good.
one.
Hello.
Hi.
Actually, being that you've worked with a short list of artists, what would you say would your favorite genre be to mix?
You're familiar with Crowded House? That kind of thing? Yeah, there you go. That sort of style where it's rock music, but it's, I guess, kind of soft rock, you might say, but with great lyrics and great melodies. Squeeze is another one. In fact, I'd love to play a Squeeze track from their new album. It's just stunning. And that kind of music. The Pretenders I always liked. Of course, I got to work with them too. Sort of jangly rock music, not real heavy rock, but that kind of thing. Just jangly, melodic rock music. That's my favorite thing. Although I'll mix heavy rock stuff. I'll mix R&B. I'll mix anything you throw at me.
All right, thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for coming out. In your opinion, what separates a good record mix as well from a great record? And is there something that you do on every album that you've worked on?
I can't say there's something that I do on every record other than try to make it as good as it could be.
Right.
There isn't, but it isn't one consistent formula that I use. I don't think, and I mean there could be that I'm not aware of, but I'm not aware. And wait, sorry, what was the first part of the question again?
The other question was, to you, what separates a good song
from
and a good mix
from a great
from
one?
a great mix and a good great song?
I think the great mix is one that you can sit down and listen to, and never even think of commenting on the mix. You know what I mean? Where you just love the song, and the mix should be, to me, a great mix is transparent, and it's just the music that comes through, the performance, the lyric, the performance of the singer, performance of the all the instruments, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Hi, I'm Tyler.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask you, what's kind of your process for mixing drums? Because I noticed that your snares are just really, really punchy, as well as your kicks.
Well, that's it. I try to make them both really punchy.
Right.
You know, you nailed it right on the head there.
Right, but specifically, what are some techniques that you like to use?
Well,
like,
the snare
on a
drum
good
is
kit?
like a parallel compression thing that I do, where I'll just bring it up on two faders. The one fader's got it's usually 1178 and a Pultec EQ, some 5 or 8K, something like that, and then just mix it with just the straight one, and I'll just do some SSL EQ to sort of match it a little bit. The kick drum, if it's recorded really well, if like it's really punching and mixing, blending with the bass and accenting, you know, and doing the right thing, I'll just use what's recorded. But quite often, bass drums are very hard to record, I think, and even I have trouble. I rarely get it when I'm recording, and so very often I have a bunch of bass drums that I really like that I'll just stick a sample in there with it, using a Drumagog, which is kind of our favorite drum replacement plug-in there.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming out, Bob. I'm an instructor here. I'm the guy that teaches Melodyne, unfortunately. But I just wanted to ask.
I don't mean to put down Melodyne, don't get me wrong.
No, I always tell the students, get it right on the way in. But
yeah.
Just for selfish reasons, I'm still a student of the music history.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing about the Bowie stuff is amazing to me. And did you meet Bowie at all before from the Ian Hunter album, or is that more from the Chic connection with Nile Rodgers?
It's more with Nile. I mean, he recorded the album before Let's Dance called Scary Monsters. He did that, the basic tracks. Okay. He and Tony Visconti did it at Power Station Studio A with another guy named Larry Alexander, who's one of the great Power Station engineers. And that was like one of my favorite records. I was just such a fan of that record. And but I used to see him around the studio, and I said hello a couple times. You know, I never really talked to him much.
Gotcha. And then just a couple quick ones. Who's your favorite Ramone? Because I know you worked with the Ramones.
I didn't know them that well. I just did I think one session with them. But the original drummer, Tommy Erdelai, Tommy Ramone, he was my favorite because he was the only one I actually knew very well. He was a great guy because he used to come. He was friends of ours, and he used to come in and hang around sessions sometimes.
And then talking about dealing with providing the mix that the artist envisions, how do you go about that when it's deciding between Bowie and Niles Rodgers, like who's correct? Or another favorite one, Should I Stay or Should I Go by the Clash? Were you involved in between the battle between Mick and Joe Strummer, because that was kind of near the end of the...
I didn't actually mix that
you didn't?
one.
You
No,
didn't? Okay,
I did mix Rock the Casbah, though.
Rock
That's
the
okay.
Casbah, that's what I meant.
It's all right.
Yeah.
No, I totally understand. I mix songs up all the time. That was just with Mick Jones.
So it just was with Mick?
Yeah, Joe wasn't around. Unfortunately, I never got to meet... I was a huge Joe Strummer fan, and I never got to meet him, unfortunately. You know, I thought he made some great records on his solo career. Yeah, but it was just with Mick.
Okay. Well, thanks for amusing me.
I had a little problem with Mick Jones because he kind of chain smoked marijuana, and I'm a little bit allergic to it. And so it's kind of a problem.
Focus was a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right. Well, really, thanks for coming out. This has been amazing. So, thank you.
Okay.
So we're about to educate you guys a little bit, because outside of the instructors, how many of you guys have heard the band Squeeze? Probably a few. So, do you want to?
Yeah. Now this is from their new album.
Because I saw your eyes light up, because I was like, this is a little labor.
Well, these guys, I was just a big fan of these guys back in the late '70s. I mean, they've been around a long time, and then I mixed a couple records for them in the '80s over at Peter Gabriel's studio, Real World, which is an experience in itself. And so just recently they called me up and said, "Oh, we have a new record? Could you mix it?" And this record I just think is stunning. Now I'm going to play a song off the record that, reading all the reviews, this is like the least favorite song on the record. I think maybe it's a what?
Is it Mayor in Wilson Park?
No.
My Only True Friend.
I forgot the name of it.
I'm not sure if I have it. Sorry.
It's not in there. All right. Okay. No. Actually, I'll play a more popular one instead, because the one I was looking for isn't in there. Yeah. Play Marion Wilson Park. This is actually called Patchouli. It was originally called Marion Wilson Park, and they changed the name for some reason. But it's just a beautiful song.
Some days I wonder what I'm doing. I sit and think too much sometimes. I waste the hours that God has set me, drifting like dust along bloodlines. It's quite normal for me to fester and wallow in a shallow space that separates us from each other. I see the smile upon your face. I smell patchouli, I touch the air above your head. I see your beauty, I'm transported back again to that day the sky went dark. Marion Wilson Park. I'm always looking out of windows to see the sky and hear the day. I always find the lost horizon, the one we shared that gave away. I smell patchouli, I touch the air above your head. I see your beauty, I'm transported back again to that day the sky went dark in Marion Wilson Park. To that day the sky went dark in Marion Wilson Park.
I just want to get to the solo because how many rock bands have a harpsichord solo?
It's like I followed that band for, most of from the 70s on, and the vocal stuff that those guys do is just insane. And I noticed I was hearing a lot of stuff, depth-wise in the mix that was pretty interesting on that.
Yeah, it's Chris Difford and Glenn Tilbrook, and Chris does that low octave. That's a real signature thing for that band. Glenn sings the high part, and Chris does just an octave, just doubling it an octave down, and that's pretty cool. And then they do all these harmonies. There's some things on this record with choirs. There's one track that's got an opera singer on it. Really, they just step way over the line as far as pop music goes into unusual territories, but it all works. That's the thing.
So,
anyway,
and that's going to kind of bring us to the
album.
last artist that I really kind of want to talk about is Nico Costa's. This record is, for me, you produced a little bit, like you said, her husband produced a lot, but kind of explain the approach to this one, because it's definitely sonically a different
than anything that we played for you guys today. You know, it's a very contrast to, you know, kind of almost the modern Bob, if you will.
What's unusual for me, because there's no guitars on it and there's no synthesizers on it either. It's piano, bass, drums, and a string quartet and vocal. And it was mostly cut live. In fact, most of the vocal that you'll hear, she sang with the band, with the strings. Strings were off to her right. The drums were in front of her. She was in a gobo booth in the middle of A&M Studios, or Henson's now called Henson Studios. You know, the piano's off to the left. The pianist did the arrangements, and he's also conducting the strings while he's playing piano. And this song, you will know this. Most of you will know this song, and it's because she was really good friends with the guy who passed away that wrote it, a guy named Prince, who wrote it.
It's been 7 hours and 15 days since you took your love away. I go out every night and sleep all day since you took your love away. Since you've been gone, I can do whatever I want. I can see whomever I choose. I can eat my dinner in a fancy restaurant, but nothing, said nothing can take away these blues.
So the dryness, from 80s exploding snare drums to as in your face as that can be, I mean,
completely different.
And what's your emotion about that? I mean, as far as, you know, when you hear that back, you know, I mean, obviously we have a lot of low end up here, but I'm just saying, like, does it really, like, do you feel like that's an evolution? Do you feel like that's something, you know, that you've kind of like gone through all these phases and you can kind of do everything, but almost going back to the basics with that is the right thing? Because that could have been mixed anyway. I mean, that could have been mixed a million ways.
Yeah, and I did mix it a few different ways until we figured out exactly, you know, that sort of ambience. I originally mixed it with more reverb and more sort of classically. But what I realized when I added more reverb to it, that I wasn't getting the feeling that I had in the studio when it was recorded. I mean, you got to understand, these guys are in front of me. That's just a performance. There's no overdubs on that at all. And I was standing there in the control room just with my jaw on the floor, because she's just unbelievable. She's so incredible, such an amazing singer. And the whole album is just remarkable. And so I really wanted to get the feeling that I had in the studio when they played it, and I think I got real close to it. And yeah, like I say, it's not, you know, I don't think of it as, oh well, I'm not going to mix it real echoey, or I'm not going to do this because it's some sort of evolution. It's just what makes the music sound best, what brings it to life the most, and what gets the most emotion out of it. Especially a record like that, it's very emotional. Especially this particular song, because she was really good friends with Prince, and it was a huge thing to her that when he passed away, because they were very close, and so she's kind of honoring her by doing this song, I think.
Yeah, it's a crazy record. You guys should definitely listen to it. Closing statements from Sergio. What can you tell them that's going to help them out there?
Okay, I got one thing that I think has helped me through being in this sort of position, I guess, because it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard. But one thing that Brandon told me, was Bob's former assistant, just kind of offhand, like not even. He's amazing at just figuring like making things work when you're like, there's no way this could work. And so I don't know. One time he made something work, something on the knee, and I was like, dude, how do you do that? Like, how do you just figure, like, how did you know? He's like, I didn't. He's like, I just will it to work, and that's all I do. And that just, I didn't even really understand what he meant. I just laughed it off. I thought it was a joke, and it just stuck with me. And anytime I was ever in a situation where I was like, how am I going to figure this out? I was just like, you just do, you just kind of find the will to figure it out, and then you do, and then suddenly you like it becomes like a muscle or like an exercise that you do on things that get thrown at you, because I think you'll find that you get thrown into the fire a lot, especially in like this kind of industry, entertainment kind of thing, because everything has to be like, and you have to do it perfect every time, and I mean that's just not possible. So mistakes are going to happen, and you got to roll with the punches, like learn from your mistakes, and hopefully you're quick on your feet, right? Because that's a big part.
Yeah, I've always felt there's a motto for Mix This that I've always felt, and we actually had it printed on the little cards. There's always a way, right? No matter what you think, don't ever let, somebody asks you to do some crazy effect, or if you think of some nutty effect that you want to try to do, don't ever think, oh, well, there's just no way I'm going to be able to do that. You'll figure it out. Just work on it. And there's always a way to do pretty much anything when you're making records or making music, recording, mixing.
I don't even want to make a closing statement after that. I'm going to leave it at what Bob just said.
Always
And
a way.
I just want, you guys were a great audience. I want from Full Sail from you guys. Let's thank Bob for being here.
Thank you for coming.